Order. Can I remind honourable members that there have been some changes to normal practice in order to support the new hybrid arrangements. The timings of debates have been amended to allow technical arrangements to be made for the next debate. There will also be suspensions between each debate. I remind members participating physically and virtually that they must arrive for the start of debates in Westminster Hall. Members are expected to remain for the entire debate. I must also remind members participating virtually that they're visible at all times, both to each other and to us in the Boothroyd room. If members attending virtually have any technical problems, they should email the Westminster Hall clerks. The email address is westminsterhallclerks@parliament.uk. Members attending physically should clean their spaces before they use them and as they leave the room. I'd also like to remind members that Mr Speaker has stated that masks should be worn in Westminster Hall. Nick Fletcher to move the motion.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. I beg to move petition 565102 relating to international travel and COVID-19. Another petition and another COVID story that is either desperately sad, frustrating on an emotional and economic level, sometimes both. Governing is always challenging, but since March last year the government's had to make a series of exceptionally difficult decisions. One issue that has been a source of continual controversy is travel. Who should be able to do it, for what reasons, where they should be permitted to go, and the conditions that should apply on their re-entry. Of course, when deciding these restrictions, protecting public safety is paramount, but I also know that ministers have had to make these decisions while balancing a number of competing demands. This debate concerns two of those competing demands, which affect both the personal and the professional lives of people in my constituency and across the country. First is the effect of travel restrictions on people in long-distance relationships, and secondly, the financial hardship that the travel industry has suffered. Let me speak on the travel restrictions first. While most people who don't live with their partner have spent the last year worrying about bubbles and outdoor walks, those whose partners live abroad have dealt with concerns that are on another scale. People in long-distance relationships are used to spending time apart, but 14 months is quite a long time. For a substantial period of this travel has been illegal for all intents and purposes. Even when it has technically been allowed, the cost of testing and quarantining has made travel prohibitively expensive. I recently spoke with a young woman named Katie who started this petition. Her partner, David, lives in Germany, and they have known one another for 4 years. Before the pandemic, they used to visit one another regularly. These trips would cost on average around £200. Now that Germany is on the amber list, the same trip would cost her £600, not including any income she may lose whilst isolating. And if Germany were on the red list, it would cost £2,400. As a result, Katie and David have only seen one another 3 times in the last 18 months. According to a survey conducted by the group Love Is Not Tourism, the impact of extended separation on people in long-distance relationship has been significant. Over the 400 people in the binational relationships questioned for this survey, many had felt depressed, hopeless, and said they were finding it difficult to do their work or take care of things at home. Sadly, Love Is Not Tourism has said that 18 people in long-distance relationship have lost their partners to suicide. While suicide is a complex issue and does not have one single cause, it is impossible to deny that the distress caused by extended separation must have played a part. In a survey run by the Petitions Committee of those who signed this petition, one respondent said, "I have been separated from my partner for over a year. The stress, sadness and wait alone, literally alone, for any news the travel restrictions to the US will be lifted is horrendous. He cannot come here to the UK because of work commitments. Only I am in the position to travel to him." This comment is typical of those who submitted feedback. While this issue primarily affects partners, parents and children who live in different countries have also been significantly impacted. Travel restrictions have meant that some people with young children have not been able to see them in many months. I know the government will have looked at the data on the risk of infection when setting out valid reasons for travel during the last lockdown, but it does strike some people as unfair that one can travel abroad for a business meeting, but seeing one's partner or parents is treated the same as a holiday. This was another common theme in the feedback this committee received, with one respondent writing, "My father splits his time between the UK and Argentina. His wife is Argentine and has children resident in Argentina. Dad has myself, my sister and 3 grandchildren who are all desperate to see him. I haven't seen Dad since the 13th of March 2020. I understand why restrictions had to be put in place. I followed every rule. Dad doesn't want a holiday, he just wants to see his family." Since last August, the German government has allowed the non-EU unmarried partners into the country, providing they can demonstrate that they are in a long-term relationship and have met in person before. There are reasonable requirements that the vast majority of those in long-distance relationships will be able to meet, and if we had something similar during this past year, it may have saved many people quite a lot of heartache and stress. Unfortunately, now that Germany has declared the UK an area of virus variants concern, people such as Katie and David will face even more challenges seeing one another. I understand that travel restrictions have been necessary over the past year, and in the middle of us loosening restrictions, the appearance of the Indian variant has not helped the petitioners' argument. However, I would urge the government to consider making allowance for people to visit their partners along the lines of what Germany has had if we are ever to be in this position again. Let's all truly hope not. Turning to the professional side of the debate, travel restrictions have clearly had a severe impact on all parts of the travel industry. This covers a range of businesses from hotels to airlines, including my very own Doncaster Sheffield Airport. But today I would like to discuss travel agents, who I believe have been disproportionately impacted, even among those in the travel sector, simply because of the structure of their businesses. Since the pandemic began, travel bookings have been down 80%. In March, 57% of SME travel agents said they did not have enough cash to survive more than 6 months given current restrictions, and 87% thought they would fail within a year. Last week, I had the opportunity to speak with Luke Petherbridge from the Association of British Travel Agents. He stressed that in addition to suffering all the same pressures as the rest of the travel industry, travel agents have been in particular precarious position because they do not receive their commission until their customers actually travel. When customers cancel, travel agents have had to issue refunds out of their own accounts while waiting for suppliers to refund them. ABTA estimates that 195,000 people working in travel agencies have already lost their jobs or are at risk of it. Travel agents have not been able to take full advantage of the furlough scheme either, because staff have been required to issue refunds and manage rebookings, activities that do not bring in any revenue but prevent companies from claiming the job retention scheme. I know this from speaking to 2 private travel agents within my own constituency at Ideal Travel and Small World Travel, who have worked desperately hard to keep their customers happy. I hope this will be repaid locally when my constituents are booking their holidays over the coming years. Frequent changes in travel advice, although many will agree necessary, will prevent travel agents from making long-term plans too. ABTA members are also concerned that what government support they can access will be wound down too quickly because of the amount of time it will take for their industry to return to normal operations. There are a range of measures the government could take to help travel agents, and I would ask the ministers to consider them. Extending the self-employed income support scheme, along with full business rates relief for businesses operating in international travel, would all make a notable difference. I believe that the wider use of the NHS COVID tests and lateral flow tests can help both those travelling to visit their loved ones and travel agents whose livelihoods are dependent on tourism. The requirement for multiple PCR tests was heavily criticised by petitioners who believe it is disproportionate and exploitative. One survey respondent wrote, "I think it is excessively expensive. Seeing your family shouldn't be a luxury." People also do not understand why the NHS test is not accepted for travel, with people instead having to pay hundreds of pounds for private PCR tests. Another petitioner said flights don't allow NHS tests to be used as pre-departure tests, which seems odd. Surely the test provided by our National Health Service should be sufficient. So my ask of the Minister here today is to work with colleagues in government to see if it will be possible to allow people to use NHS and lateral flow tests, as this would remove significant financial burden for travellers visiting loved ones and be a more realistic possibility in helping the travel sector to recover more quickly. And my ask to the petitioners and the good people of this country is to please continue to come forward for your vaccination. And although it's hard, just for a little longer, bear with the restrictions. It really is the only way of getting us and the rest of the world back to some kind of normality. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 565-102 relating to international travel and COVID-19. Mr Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you very much, Mrs Favar. Again, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to follow the excellent speech by the honourable gentleman. I'd also like to thank all of those who signed this petition, including 300 of my own constituents. Many of them have heartrending stories of separation from family or other loved ones, or of missing out on deathbed visits, on weddings, funerals, and baptisms. For some, this separation, with all its consequences with mental health, goes back well over a year, particularly if they were not lucky enough to be able to make use of some of the limited travel allowed to some countries by last year's travel corridors. Tonight's debate is a useful corrective to the recent media coverage about travel that has tended to focus on holidays. Well, we shouldn't have a problem with people taking safe holidays. I certainly don't. But this is also about the millions of people in Britain who have family or loved ones in another country and who have been unable to see them and are longing to do so. More than 1/3 of children born in the United Kingdom have at least one parent who was not born here. That illustrates the scale of the separation many of our constituents are experiencing. Outward travel from Britain in a normal year generates £37 billion for our economy and sustains 526,000 jobs. Inward travel generates £28 billion and sustains 450,000 jobs. And this is not to include the value of business and professional travel, which is estimated by the Business Travel Association to be even greater. Now, nobody, at least almost nobody, has been arguing that we shouldn't have any restrictions on travel at all. Every other country that's similar to the United Kingdom in terms of our economy and the impact of COVID has had foreign travel restrictions. But my concern now is that the government, having perhaps not been cautious enough on travel earlier in the pandemic, is being overcautious now as we come out of it, given the evidence and the data, and especially given the success and advanced state of our vaccination programme. Just look at what other countries are now doing, Mrs Favag. Vaccinated Americans are now free to travel. Most of our European neighbours are free to travel with either proof of vaccination or a negative antigen test, which is cheaply and widely available, including at most airports. A number of countries, including Greece, Spain, Italy, and Portugal, which, yes, are popular holiday destinations for British people, but also countries with which people living here have many family and other ties, are already welcoming British people with open arms, at the most requiring proof of vaccine or a negative antigen test, or in the case of Spain, from today, neither. But for most people in Britain, the fact that these other countries are ready to welcome us is meaningless, as with the exception of Portugal, all are on the government's orange list, requiring quarantine on your return, as well as multiple expensive PCR tests. Back in February, Mrs Favag, as our vaccination programme was roaring ahead compared with the rest of Europe, there was a front page headline in the German tabloid newspaper, the Bild-Zeitung, along the lines of, quote, "The Germans are green with envy because the Brits will get to the sunbeds first this year." This was a comment on our stellar vaccination programme. And it may sound glib for me to press this point, but the Germans and other Europeans are already on the sunbeds in Spain, Greece, and Italy. The British, by and large, are not. We were promised and we were led to expect a vaccine dividend, but when it comes to foreign travel, we have the opposite. The British are not only under tighter travel restrictions than our European neighbours, we are more restricted than we were last summer, despite having the most vaccinated population in Europe after Malta. Now, some will say in response, and I'm sure the Minister will later, but the variants. Of course, we must be on guard against new variants, against which the vaccines might not provide such a strong defence. However, we already know, and the government confirmed this week, that the vaccines are successful against all the current known variants. And if the post-vaccine reality is that we will have to live with this virus, and on that there does seem to be a consensus, then yes, by all means, have a red list for countries of concern, but are we really going to keep our borders effectively closed and travel restricted from places that don't pose a risk, with all that entails in terms of prolonged family separation, lost jobs, and an even greater damage to our economy? Now, the government itself claims to have a risk-based approach, Mrs. Vervaag, so perhaps the Minister could answer the following questions when she responds. Why does she believe that Germany, which has an overall very good record in dealing with COVID and just as much concern for its citizens as we do, as well as other comparable countries, why do they allow their citizens more freedom than we do? Can she explain why the long-awaited green list of countries was so limited when the infection rates in America and across Europe have been falling rapidly and vaccination rates increasing rapidly? And why was Malta, with a higher vaccination rate and lower COVID rate than the UK, left off the green list? It would be really helpful, both to the public and to our long-suffering travel and transport sectors, if the government published its criteria for deciding whether a country is red, amber or green. The European Union has done this, why can't we? Now, the government says it still has an islands policy, as it did last year, but this was not apparent when it published its green list, as numerous Greek and Spanish islands, which have lower infection and higher vaccine rates than Portugal, were not on that list. So will she confirm that we do still have an islands policy and that will be clear in the next review? And what conversations has she had with her colleagues in the Home Office about the unacceptably long waits and mixing of arrivees from different traffic light countries at Heathrow Airport? It is welcome that there is belatedly to be a designated terminal for people arriving from red countries, but the rest of Europe already operates digitisation for arrivals, and that must surely be possible here, especially for arrivals from green countries. And will she ensure the inconsistency between what the government in Britain as a whole says about travelling and the Foreign Office advice says is addressed? Because this is only added to the confusion for the public and the travel industry. And why, when a pre-arrival 20-minute antigen test is enough for Germany and most of our neighbours, why is the UK still insisting, even for green countries, on an expensive pre-return PCR test, which has to be in English, Spanish or French, not available everywhere, and another PCR test after you've returned? Mrs. Vervaag, the sacrifices people have made over more than a year, along with our very successful vaccination programme, should mean, as we adapt to living with COVID, that the UK is in a better place and ahead of other countries as we emerge from this terrible period. But when it comes to travel, we are not ahead. We are behind our main neighbours and competitors. And this is already having consequences in terms of prolonged heartache and worse for our constituents who are separated from family and loved ones, and in terms of jobs lost in our vital travel and transport sectors. Before this pandemic, we were world leaders in these sectors. But now global Britain, as the government likes to refer to us, is losing income, business and trade to our competitors in other countries as they have opened up for travel ahead of us. All I ask, Mrs. Vervaag, is that the government bears all this in mind, alongside its desire to restrict people's freedoms to protect public health when it comes to making the important decisions it has to take on travel in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you. Can I ask members if they could try and keep their speeches to 5 minutes so that we can get the Minister in? I'd now like to call Hugh Merriman.
Mrs. Vervaag, thank you very much indeed for calling me for this important Westminster Hall debate. And I'd like to thank all of the over 100,000 petitioners who have made their voices heard. And I think it's particularly welcome to hear the case for families seeing their partners, in the sense of those that are not married, and also their friends and generally loved ones, because for far too long with this debate, we are told that people should not be able to go on holiday, something that, like the previous Speaker, the Honourable Member for Exeter, I profoundly disagree with. People should be entitled to go on holiday. What has come to our country when we seek to demonise those that wish to go on holiday? But for a lot of people, it's a trip abroad to see loved ones, those that they're in a relationship with, who they have not seen for over a year in certain circumstances. And that, to me, demonstrates that there is a need, a compassionate need, to look upon those individuals and give them the opportunity to get back and see their family, their friends and their loved ones. And I absolutely get behind those e-petitioners, and they have my full support. But I actually wish to support them fully by trying to get not just them to be able to travel abroad, but also others as well that have legitimate reasons why they should go abroad, and why I believe it is now safe and proportionate for them to be able to do so. And I'm very grateful to those e-petitioners that the Transport Select Committee has had the ability to tag onto the back of this debate reports that we, as a Select Committee, have made with our recommendations to Government. And there are two reports, the first of which is dated the 9th of March of this year, where, as a Select Committee, we pushed for the Government to ensure that the Global Travel Task Force published for the 12th of April in order to unlock international travel by the 17th of May, and we were glad that the Government largely did that in terms of the dates. But I think perhaps the more pertinent report and the more relevant, certainly in terms of time, is that from the 20th of April of this year, where the Select Committee made a number of recommendations, and I think it's worth highlighting them if you don't mind, Mrs Favard. Firstly, that the traffic light system be populated by the 1st of May to give industry and travellers sufficient time to be able to work out the rules and be able to navigate them and comply by them. Secondly, that the criteria for change of those traffic lights be set out in full by the 1st of May. And thirdly, that the testing requirements are proportionate to the risk set out in those traffic light sets. And finally, that border force resourcing and the sponsorship of digital arrivals means that more people can safely come through the airport terminal. Now, I was disappointed when by the 1st of May nothing arrived, but obviously we did hear something on the 7th of May. We also heard something on the criteria set, which I welcome. But I would just say on those first two, I was absolutely underwhelmed by the numbers of countries on the green list and the sheer number on the amber list. It was incredibly disappointing for the reasons I'll set forth. I'm also conscious, Mrs Farhag, that there is no time limit, and I should have actually checked what time I was starting, and I didn't. So unlike the previous speaker, he had the benefit of a time clock, and I don't. I'll give myself 2 more minutes, but I do apologise if I'm overdoing it. The final matter, border force resourcing. I was very pleased that the resourcing was stepped up by the Government, and indeed the digitisation of the e-gates will come into force as well. Some progress there. But I really want to make the ultimate plea to the Government, which is this. We have got to a situation now where we have given 70% of the UK population the first dose of the vaccination. 34% have been fully vaccinated. That's 60 million vaccines have been put into arms. And in my view, it's essential that we get moving and give people their liberties and their freedoms back, not just for them as individuals, but also to employ the 500,000 people who rely on international travel in our economy. And I also want to make the absolute point of this, that I'm not glib when it comes to safety, but this vaccine and the latest mutant strain has been demonstrated to be effective when it comes to the vaccination. So if we take the view that we can never unlock because there may be a risk of a mutant strain, then frankly we'll never be able to fly again. And it has to come to a point in time where we look at the proportionality, we look at the health risks involved, we look at the mitigation that is already in place against those health risks, so the testing, the quarantine, and we then look at what's good for the economy and people's individual freedoms. Otherwise, what is the point of having this successful vaccination programme? Where is the vaccination dividend? And when can we get back to a situation whereby people can go back to visit their loved ones, their friends, their families, and indeed take a well-earned holiday, and we then prove to the British people that it was worth it after all? I apologise profusely if I've gone over the time. Had I had the clock, I would have ensured I didn't. Thank you.
Mr Virendra Sharma.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a great pleasure to speak under your leadership. I would like to thank all those people who signed the petition. I want to speak briefly on two important points. My constituents rely on Heathrow Airport for jobs and the energy they bring to the local economy, and so do many of the areas around my constituency. The last 15 months have been extremely difficult for them, and the recovery now needs to be meaningful and consistent to save businesses and livelihoods. Local employers need the certainty a safe return to safe international travel brings, and they need investment. A dedicated place arrivals facility will make things safer and increase confidence that the UK's only hub airport is supported as a safe travel route. Government commitments to make this logistically and financially viable are needed, and an answer sooner rather than later will ensure safe travel for millions this summer is possible. I have previously raised in the House the need for border force to properly staff entry points, and by bringing enough staff to bear, we can rebuild trust and keep people safe. Infrastructure on the ground should not be the second thought. It needs to be central to our planning. My second point, Chair, is where we support recovery. I want to see investment in recovery made in places that embody our values. We should be supporting not a return to normal, but building back better. Ecotourism is not exclusively branding. It supports the communities it inhabits. Not just the preserve of the wealthy, it can save environments, communities, and species from extinction. Supporting protection efforts around the world, good ecotourism is about preservation and conservation. It is also about animal welfare, and I also have been proud to be a parliamentary supporter of Save the Asian Elephant for many years now. Their work has done more than any other, so shine a light on unethical tourism. And just last week, their newest petition reached over 1 million signatures. I urge everyone here today to sign. Unfortunately, working with Stay, we have not yet been successful in convincing ABTA, the travel association, that totally disassociate themselves from cruel and unethical elephant venues. I hope that when we think about steps we are taking holidays and international travel, we put our morals and beliefs at the heart of any strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Forgard. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, and can I congratulate my honourable friend for Don Valley upon securing this very important debate. I very much agree with many of the observations that have already been made by members on both sides, and it's an important message that the government has to grasp and be honest with the public about, and that's this. If there's a point in the vaccination programme, A, it's of course obviously to save lives, but B, it is to enable a return as closely as and as swiftly as we safely can to normality. And travel, international travel, for whatever reason, is a part of normality, be it for family reunions, as has been eloquently said, and many of us will know that from our constituency, be it for tourism, be it very importantly in constituencies like mine with a big financial services sector, for business. But also we shouldn't forget for cultural and educational exchange as well. We have got to have investment and a clear strategy for getting back safely to that normality. And I'm grateful for the 220 plus constituents of mine in Bromley and Chislehurst, who for a number of reasons have signed this petition. I appreciate the point that was made by my honourable friend, the chairman of the Select Committee. To do this, we have to say, A, that we do not demonise those who seek to go on holiday. B, we must give real recognition to the value of this sector to the economy. And C, we must be prepared to invest in technology. I'm glad he picked up the point about investment in border force and at the border. One of my constituents who works in the travel sector, who was made redundant herself and has now set up a small business herself, one, if you like, of something like the 60% plus of people who are working for travel management companies who have been made redundant since the pandemic. She, in her endeavour to get back on her feet, points out the very good work that's being done on technology and ADI, for example, by organisations such as Verifly Seamless Travel. Now, technologies that they have come up with are used in the United States already. They already work with US airlines. They already have technologies in operation at Denver International Airport. They work already in if you like, pilot and discuss trial schemes with British Airways. We need to be getting behind and encouraging this. That's how you deal with the variants, is to be fleet of foot and to adapt. If we can do that by investing in that technology, if, as was said, we can invest in better separation of people coming from different classifications of countries at the terminals, that is a safe means of getting things moving forward. And if we are going to live with the virus for some, or its variants for some time, hopefully diminished terms of toxicity, nonetheless, that investment is a long-term one that should be worth paying off. Can I also point out the importance of inbound tourism into the UK? It is, as has been observed, worth about 28 billion in earnings itself. It's the third largest service export sector. And there are real difficulties there because of what appear to be confused guidelines, an arbitrary approach, and lack of transparency and clarity as to the traffic light system and as to what is the criteria by which countries, has been pointed out, is sometimes frankly better levels on what appears to be an objective view than ourselves in tackling with infection on an amber list as opposed to a green one. But also a recognition that the infrastructure of that sector needs to be supported. The question of continuing business rate support, for example, for those still operating on the high street. I've seen a firm in my constituency go under, they've been in business for 30 years. It was a lifetime's work, gone. What can be done to continue furlough and support on a sector-led basis? We really need a new sector-specific scheme of recovery grants for travel agents. We need particularly to be able to look at the position of inbound operators, because they bring, through the travel management companies, in some 50% of international visitors to the UK. That's the loss of that income to towns and cities across the United Kingdom has been estimated as being up to £18 billion a year. And let's be frank, domestic tourism, whilst it's worthy and certainly to be encouraged, and we all enjoy in doing it ourselves, will not make up the shortfall, because the spend per head of domestic visitors is consistently significantly less. Something like £239 a head to £696 per head on average during their trips. So that just will not plug the gap. And otherwise, firms, businesses, towns and villages, cities dependent on tourism will suffer gravely and needlessly. The fact is, our European and neighbours, including in Ireland, are being more supportive of the sector through their support regimes than we are at the moment, and appear at the moment to being more fleet of foot as to how they put in place safeguards for safe reopening of international travel. We need to learn from that, and we need, with the huge success of our vaccination programme, to be in front of the pack rather than playing catch up in this regard. We need that for the long-term sustainability of a critical sector for our economy. Thank you.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Fauvargue. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd also like to congratulate the member for Don Valley for bringing this very important debate, very timely debate also. I'm going to stick to my 5 minutes by merely supporting what many members have already said, in particular the member for Exeter and also the chair of the Transport Select Committee, the member for Bexhill and Battle. Many of the points that they made are points that I would like, as I say, to support. There's no doubt that the government's got lots of very difficult decisions to make in terms of how we reopen our travel sector as we come out of the pandemic, which we all very much hope we are now doing, thanks obviously to the huge success of the vaccine rollout. I represent a constituency in Richmond Park which employs many people across the travel sector and in the tourism sector, and many people own businesses. And I'm hearing from my constituents a huge amount of frustration at the lack of clarity surrounding the overall strategy for allowing international travel and reopening the sector. And above all, what's really needed is a great deal more clarity on how decisions are being made, in particular with reference to which countries are on the green, the amber and the red list. I share the Transport Select Committee chair's dismay at the very small number of countries that are on the green list. But what is causing a great deal of confusion is it's not clear what the criteria are. We've heard a great deal in recent weeks about India, for example, not being on the red list despite cases and other circumstances being more severe than countries that were on the red list. And I think it's really, really important that we have clarity about why countries are on the red list or on the amber list. And I think what's most important for the travel industry to be able to plan, to be able to predict, to be able to look at conditions that are currently prevailing in certain countries and think, well, are they on the way out? Have they got a vaccine program? Are they rolling out? What is the likelihood that we will be able to travel freely to that country in July, in August, in September? Because I think if we've got more clarity about why decisions are being made and when countries we might be allowed to travel to certain countries freely again, then that will make a huge amount of difference. But of course, as I think the honourable member for Bromley and Chislehurst was just saying, it's not just about the travel industry. We need this this clarity to provide certainty for so many sectors that depend upon travel. He highlighted inbound tourism, and of course that's a big issue for people in my constituency and in the wider area. My former employer was Hampton Court Palace, and I know how much they depend, for example, on visitors, particularly from America and Europe, and so they are really, really suffering at the moment. But it's our broader economy, as our business travellers, our cultural sector travellers, they all want to be able to plan for a much greater reopening in the autumn, and without a much better understanding of how the government is approaching the opening up, it's really, really very difficult. I wanted to particularly highlight the issue of testing. When you're coming into the country from an amber list country and you need to test on day 2 and day 8, I was really appalled to hear from a constituent about the cost of these tests. I had naively assumed that they would be free, as tests are for every resident here. If tests are freely available for everybody if they need to test. I cannot understand why we are charging travellers up to £150 for each of these tests. For a family of 4 who are travelling in and have to do tests on day 2 and day 8, that's £600 just as an extra cost. And this particular petition is on the particular needs of those who have family and friends and partners abroad. And my heart goes out to those people who might have dying relatives in other countries, and of course that's a situation that far too many families find themselves in. I have many constituents who have family and friends, particularly in European countries. We have a lot of European nationals here in Richmond Park, finding it incredibly difficult already to be able to travel to them, and having a need to travel on this particular time when so many families are really, really struggling. To have this additional cost of these tests, I really find that inconceivable. And as part of a wider strategy to make international travel possible and safe again, it just beggars belief that we are charging this extraordinary amount for these tests. And I would really urge the government to have another look at that, because it's not just a barrier for people who are traveling travelling for whatever reason they want to travel now, but it will continue to be a barrier. And if it's going to be part of our strategy to opening up, be a barrier to business, a barrier to trade, a barrier to tourism, and we really, really must address that. So I would urge the government in particular to look at providing greater clarity around how travel can be made possible, but particularly around the cost of tests. Thank you very much, Mrs. Vivaga.
Thank you. Nikki Aitken.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship in this important Westminster Hall debate this evening. And I'd also like to thank my honourable friend for the Don Valley for securing this debate. Like other honourable members, I've heard from many constituents recently on the issue of international travel and COVID-19 restrictions. And with over 1,200 signatories to the petition within the cities of London and Westminster, my constituency, it is clearly a subject that is close to the heart of my constituents and one which should rightly be reviewed in light of new data. No doubt we are in a very different position now to the one we were dealing with last year. We now have the tools to facilitate both travel and health with advancements in testing as well as the exceptional vaccine rollout that was quite simply not available 12 months ago. Indeed, so much has changed even since the government's response to this petition was published last month, with new data suggesting that vaccines are effective and working well against the new Indian variant as well. I do support the government's roadmap and accept the traffic light system for non-essential international travel. But when it comes to small-scale, case-by-case travel for the sake of a family unit or a critical support network, I do believe that there are circumstances when we could be more pragmatic and reasonable to ensure people are not penalised for something which could dramatically affect their quality of life. I can see how devastating family separation has been for them. These are hugely emotional situations people are finding themselves in, and I think as people get vaccinated, as infections fall, one of the things people want to do first is to reconnect with their loved ones, particularly those abroad. After all, love is not tourism. What is important to note is that the issue that my constituents are facing is not necessarily the ability to travel abroad. Instead, issues occur when returning to the UK. I do not have time this evening to expound all cases that constituents have raised with me, but for example, I have seen a number of parents unable to afford or practically visit their children who are living with a partner overseas, particularly in current amber-rated countries. Making parents with custody agreements exempt from hotel quarantine, for example, provided they are vaccinated or comply with testing on their return, would make a small dent in our current guidelines, but a major impact on people's lives across my constituency and across the UK. Some of whom have not seen their children in person in over a year. That is too long to go without a hug from your mum or your dad. Here it would be sensible to adopt an approach for those people in such circumstances who cannot afford an upfront payment of £1,750 or take the 10 days annual leave away from work in a quarantine hotel. With this in mind, an option could be to consider opening up the manageable payment plan for people who have a reasonable need to travel, not just those who already receive income-related benefits. And to the same end, could there be a new assessment of allowing people to isolate themselves at home, or even finding some exemptions for parents unable to see their children under the current guidelines? Madam Chairman, we have a world-class vaccine programme which has now administered over 60 million jabs. I absolutely believe that we need to reap the benefits of the vaccination rollout with open and sensible policies to strike the right balance between safety and real-life situations. This is not to say there should be a carte blanche, but if there is a reasonable cause and proof, then I see no reason why people should not be able to travel without being subject to due stress when returning back to the UK. I hope the Minister will accept that although we do need to remain vigilant as the pandemic continues, she will accept that we will be living with COVID-19 for some time to come, and we should provide responsible but practical help for those with loved ones abroad. Thank you.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Everyone has suffered in this pandemic, and people still are. People, businesses, and I absolutely understand human contact and relationships when people, as we've heard, are cut off from seeing one another in extremely difficult circumstances, which is extremely difficult to bear. I myself have become an uncle in the last year, and it has been an entire year, pretty much, that I haven't been able to see my sister's first child. But we know why. We understand why. Because it's our effort to suppress this disease. The whole crux of our blunt efforts is to prevent its transmission. And that means limiting travel and contact with others, no matter how painful that is and continues to be. Because every pretty much decision is based around necessity and risk. Border movements alone have been one of our toughest sets of rules to get right. And the government seemingly can't do right for doing wrong. Should they allow more movement and travel through borders and risk transmission points, or do we shut ourselves off to the world, perhaps like Japan, Australia or New Zealand did? Simplistic idea, and in reality, in my view, not really possible for a globally connected international hub of commerce home to nearly 70 million people. So we manage the process, as we are doing through a traffic light system. And that, Madam Chairman, means that there are some harsh decisions that mean visiting families, boyfriends, girlfriends, has to be deemed prohibited for just a little while longer. And I agree actually with the approach that the government is taking, as hard as that might be, because policing what we have been doing alone is proving difficult enough, and to relax even further, just for the moment, is a risk too far. We saw just in the last few weeks the Indian variant spread at the rate it has. But we are incredibly close to that point because of our vaccination programme. And quite frankly, what on earth is the point in not then allowing movements if we have vaccinated over 60 million people? And there are already reasonable excuses to visit family, such as supporting someone after the birth of a child, providing care assistance, generously being able to go abroad for your own wedding, and indeed seeing loved ones for funeral arrangements. But I just want to end by saying I think there is a topic that is just as big as this, and that is the international travel industry that has been mentioned many times. They are going to need more support, and certainly while these restrictions exist, it is absolutely essential, as we have done with many businesses, to continue that life support. My constituent Nick Lee runs Broadland Travel World Choice in my North Norfolk constituency. And we understand that the traffic light system may still be in place until 2022, placing enormous restrictions on 20,000 people working in retail travel agents. Indeed, green list countries at the moment to holiday to are still very few in number. So when leisure and hospitality receives specific grants, it seems only fair that while an industry is still experiencing such suppressed trade for at least another year on top of the 18 months that they have already had, we have to consider some specific support to the travel industry. And Madam Deputy Chairman, when furlough ends, in September, many will be getting their lives back to normal. The international travel industry across the sector and the supply chain will undoubtedly still be getting back on its feet. So without travel agents and all the stakeholders connected to international travel, we will undoubtedly see more bankruptcies. This is something we have to do something about. So I would hope at the end the Minister would be able to sum up a little about what we could do for those businesses also still hoping to get back on their feet. Thank you.
James Sunderland.
Mrs Favag, it's a real pleasure to serve before you as Chair, and my apologies for being chronologically challenged. My contention today is that there is a real policy inconsistency between the success of our vaccination programme and the ongoing caution in our travel sector. So I'm going to make 3 key points, if I may. The first thing, I would urge the need for countries to open up and to send people here who are successful in their own vaccination rollouts, and that for travel purposes, a negative test result and or COVID passport should be enough for travel to be fully resumed. My second point is that there is a need for clarity, something akin to the UK roadmap of why each country is on which list and when they're likely to be moved accordingly. And thirdly, as I said earlier, is that we need to support those who are employed by the travel business sector. And UK airlines, as we know, have announced over 30,000 job cuts so far. This is devastating, and I suspect that more support is still needed for that very important sector, along with hospitality and leisure. To start with, the government should be commended for the success of our vaccination rollout programme, which is one of the best vaccination programmes in the world. And to put it in statistic terms, 37 million first doses as of yesterday and 22 million second doses, over 60 million, as my friend from London said. This is the best vaccination programme from any country with a population of more than 20 million people, with 89% of all adults having received 1 or 2 doses of the vaccination. So we need to move as soon as possible to reconnect friends and family across the world who have been unable to spend time together throughout the pandemic. So the speed at which we open up our travel sector is paramount, and we need to prioritise business travel destinations where their national vaccination programmes have proven successful, such as the United States, which will lift the burden on our travel sector to a certain degree, and why not others to be added at this point in time to the green list too. And the reasons for travel are multifarious, as we've heard. It's about leisure, it's about family, it's about business, emergency travel, and of course holidays. And why not? 76% of people in the UK are deemed to have plans to fly abroad in the next 12 months. In 2019, over 21 million trips were made by air for the purpose of visiting friends and family overseas. And also the Business Travel Association, whose member travel management companies account for over 90% of all travel booked in the UK. Their figures equate to 6.4 million journeys and 32 million transactions, resulting in £220 billion of UK GDP in a typical year. And that's just by air. So these figures are eye-watering, and our economy depends upon it. Yeah. But the resumption of business travel can only begin in earnest once the green list is updated. And as I mentioned earlier, and I'll say again, it needs to also include major business hubs such as New York, Singapore, Frankfurt, Dubai, and that's just a start. And what about Bracknell? Well, my constituency is very important to me. I've got 15 travel agency businesses who employ people in Bracknell. My constituents work at Heathrow and Gatwick and beyond. We've got hundreds of jobs in the travel and tour operators sector in Bracknell, and there are literally thousands who want and need to get away. And that's not next month, that's now. So we need to comprehensively open up as quickly as possible. And of course, our country is global. It's an international diaspora. It depends upon global trade and global movement, and it's movement which remains essential to getting our economy up and running once again. So to conclude, if I may, it is now time to get back to normal. Yes, new variants such as the Indian mutation are worrying, but mankind has lived under the spectre of new viruses for centuries and has thankfully mitigated this one with our fantastic vaccination programme. So it's now time to open up safely, and life as we know it has to go on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I thank honourable members for adhering to the time limits, and that allows 10 minutes for each opposition spokesperson and the Minister. So I'd like to call Martin Day.
Thank you, Mrs Favarg. It's a pleasure to take part in this e-petition debate, which calls on government to allow international travel to visit partners and family. There can be little doubt that travel and tourism sector has been the part of our economy hardest hit by the pandemic, and all of those wishing to travel abroad, that those separated from loved ones have been the most adversely affected. Often when we think about international travel, we think about holidays, so I'm grateful to the petitioners who rightly focus on the need to see loved ones. I know from my own experience how upsetting this can be. My partner's parents live in Kerala, and we haven't been able to visit each other throughout this prolonged period. And now, with India on the red list, who knows when we will physically see Rajama and Chandran next. Like many other families, we speak daily by video call, but it simply is not the same. Perhaps the most upsetting component of my constituency casework in this area has been that of separated families requiring international travel to take part in end-of-life visits to hopefully see their loved ones for a final time. In some cases, it was not possible. In others, it was complicated by quarantine arrangements, all of which making an already difficult situation seem even worse. For a lot of people, the current rules are clearly very distressing, and there is a need to restore normality to international travel as quickly as possible. But we must also be sensible as we do that in light of the risks that we face and in light of the risks that we see across many parts of the world. We have made so much progress in suppressing the virus, and we must not put that at risk now by enabling new variants to enter the country too easily. The current Scottish position on overseas travel is that earlier this month the First Minister confirmed some changes to the rules on travel from Scotland. From the 17th of May, Scotland moved to a traffic light system informed by risk assessments prepared by the Joint Biosecurity Centre. These assessments are based on the state of the pandemic in each country across the world and will include the presence of variants of concern. Anyone entering Scotland from a red list country will still be required to enter a managed isolation hotel and stay there for 10 days. If you arrive from a country on the amber list, you must self-isolate at home for 10 days and take 2 PCR tests during that period. And if you travel from a green list country, you will need to take a PCR test shortly after your arrival, but will not be required to self-isolate. The Scottish Government will, of course, continue to take the decisions it considers right for Scotland and will not sign up to decisions that might put our progress at risk. One area of risk which causes me concern is that the UK Border Force have been warning for weeks that they are not sufficiently resourced to handle passengers at the borders. With Border Force officials warning that passengers this summer could face 4-hour waits at UK airports due to processing documentation for COVID, one Border Force worker has been quoted saying, "The truth is that there simply isn't the capacity for staff to carry out the checks demanded by the government." While passengers are also reporting that they are waiting at border control side by side with arrivals from red list countries, despite guidance stating that they should be separate. Heathrow Airport has said that Border Force is responsible for separating the red list passengers in their immigration halls, while the Home Office has said arrangements for queues and management of returning passengers are the responsibility of the relevant airport. This blame game needs brought to an end, and the Home Secretary needs to take responsibility for these warnings at the border before the summer. In conclusion, Mrs Favarg, in my opinion, everyone should continue to limit their travel abroad, and when it comes to holidays, we should be playing it safe by holidaying at home and supporting our local tourism sector as much as we can this year. In saying that, we must also take cognizance of the thousands of jobs that depend upon international travel, jobs in aviation, the travel sector, and their supply chains. I'm told that pre-pandemic, the outbound travel sector employed over 221,000 people, contributing 37 billion to the UK economy and more than £6.3 billion to the Treasury annually. In advance of today's debate, ABTA wrote to members with its ask for a risk-based restart to international travel and targeted financial support to see the industry through to recovery. Not an unreasonable ask, given how much the UK Exchequer has benefited from this industry in previous years, how badly hit the sector has been, and the likely prolonged delay in international tourism returning to anything resembling normal. However, for many people, overseas travel is not about tourism or holidays, but about seeing family and loved ones. And clearly, more needs to be done to facilitate this. Family reunion visits should, in my opinion, be prioritised over sightseeing and international tourism. And I commend the petitioners for highlighting this need. Thank you.
Justin Madders.
Thank you, Ms Favard. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair today. And can I start by thanking the honourable member for Don Valley for introducing this important debate on international travel and COVID-19, following the petition signed by what I believe is over 100,000 people. And as he set out very clearly, I think all those people have got particular personal circumstances, long-term relationships, parents and children, which mean that they are in a very difficult situation, unfortunately a good situation, whereas we've seen the Indian variant, things aren't going to get any easier anytime soon. I also thank him for raising the very important issue of the effects on the travel industry. Like him, I have an independent local travel agency in my constituency, and it seems at the moment they're in the worst of all worlds. They have the workload from having to deal with cancellations and rebookings, but they don't have the ability to access additional support funds, nor can they, of course, furlough all their staff. So I think there is an argument for greater long-term support for that particular industry. He also raised a very important question about the cost of these tests for people re-entering the country, which we'll come back to later. But there were a number of very good contributions today. I think my right honourable friend, the member for Exeter, I think set out a number of very important issues. He clearly set out the economic impact of this on the travel industry and the hundreds of thousands of jobs that rely on it. I think the very important point, most important point he made was that many countries are allowing those who are vaccinated into their areas without additional checks, and at the moment, in terms of our policy of letting people into this country, there doesn't seem to be any distinction made between those who are vaccinated and unvaccinated, and I think it would be very useful to hear from the Minister as to why that is the case. I think most members did talk about the importance of the economics as well as the personal, and my honourable friend, the member for Ealing Southall, has particular interest with all the employees from Heathrow in his constituency, and I think he said really clarity and certainty is what they need, and that was something again that a lot of members referred to. So as we've heard, this petition calls on the government to improve in-person interaction with family members and unmarried partners, and I'm sure on a human level we can all understand that. Many of us have not been able to see our loved ones as we would have liked during the lockdowns, especially when you consider in 2019 actually over 20 million trips were made by air out of the UK for the purposes of visiting families and friends. This means new parents not being able to see their families, grandparents not being able to meet up with grandchildren, and actually many people haven't met their new family for the first time. So the timing of this debate is apposite, given last Monday's announcement that holidays abroad are no longer illegal. But there are, of course, as we've heard, different rules for different countries. And what should have been a simple colour coding scheme, amber, red and green, according to each country's risk. But, of course, as we saw last week, there were as many different interpretations of what amber means as there are countries on that list. We saw on Tuesday the Environment Secretary saying people could fly to amber list countries if they wanted to visit family or friends, something the signatories of this petition would, of course, like to see. But then by the afternoon, the Government Health Minister in the other place said nobody should travel outside Britain this year at all. Later the same day, though, the Welsh Secretary said some people might consider holidays abroad as essential. Three ministers, three different interpretations in just one day. So it was left to the Prime Minister, the paragon of precision in this place, to clear up any confusion or contradiction at Prime Minister's questions last Wednesday, where he came up with his own definition that people could still travel in extreme circumstances. Now, that, of course, is also open to interpretation, but it does at least set the bar a little higher until you remember the new rules he's actually brought in make it easier for people to travel to amber-list countries. In fact, it's even easier than that, because if you return from an amber list country, you can halve the time you spend in self-isolation by paying for an additional test after 5 days. So this is hardly a consistent message in terms of what extreme circumstances in international travel means. And perhaps the problem really is there is no definitive answer. It's all guidance now. We've had issues through the past year where distinctions between guidance and law have not been clear-cut. So we look at what the Foreign Office website tells us, and they say, and I quote, "Whether travel is essential or not is your own decision. Only you can make an informed decision based on your own individual circumstances and risks." And that's the nub of the problem. Everyone can have their own view of what is essential, and that means there is ambivalence at the heart of government policy that this virus, I'm afraid, is set to exploit. We've spent the last year painstakingly legislating for every facet of life where COVID could intrude, from when you could leave home, what time you can leave the pub, how many people can attend a funeral. Yet when it comes to one of the biggest threats in terms of our future prosperity, variance from abroad, this government is inexplicably, recklessly letting people interpret the rules for themselves. This ambiguity over amber has to end. If people shouldn't be travelling to particular countries, don't let them. It's not difficult. I can't believe, actually, that over the 100 countries in that amber list all have the same level of risk. It's very clear from what members have said, more clarity and transparency is needed about why countries are on this particular list. And one might conclude it's been left deliberately vague so the government don't have to end up compensating the travel industry for all the cancellations that will be made if there were proper laws in place on restrictions on international travel. Last week there were reported 1,300 flights carrying up to 54,000 passengers a day. So do you wish me to stop or continue?
I think if you can't hear very well, it might be worth pausing until the bell's finished.
Okay.
Would you like to continue, Justin Madden?
Thank you, Mr. Favage. Saved by the bell. I'm not sure it was me or the committee, but...
Justin Madden?
Thank you, Mr. Favage. It's almost as if someone doesn't want me to carry on speaking, but I won't be put off that easily. As I was saying, we've got the images we've all seen of people mixing at airports in red, amber and green countries, standing side by side for hours in conditions where the virus can transmit. That makes a mockery of the sacrifices people have made over the last year. Then they can move through the airports onto public transports and they go back to their homes without proper controls in place. When I asked the Home Office how many visits had been made to check on people who were supposed to be quarantining at home after returning abroad, I was told that they had no data, as this was an operational matter for the police. So in short, the government do not know whether people are complying with these rules or not. And I think that lax approach does mean the government could be overcompensating by having so many countries on the amber list. As the Honourable Member for Bromley and Chislehurst said, I think the issue is that list is not transparent. It's not clear how you get on it or how you get off it. And it does feel that some of the issues with the rest of the system may be being solved by a quick and easy way of putting lots of countries on the amber list. The Honourable Member for Richmond Park mentioned the cost of the tests for all those who are having to quarantine at home, but actually it's not just the cost of these tests, it's the actual service that people are receiving. I know that hundreds of people have had complaints about these firms that are listed on the Department of Health's website. They've either not received the test or they don't get them in time. In some cases, they don't get the results at all and they're left in limbo. Some of these private companies didn't exist at all last year. Some of them have zero experience in the area that they're benefiting from an open door policy from government, which seems that they can just request to be put on this list on the government website by declaring that they meet the required standards and that they are either UK Accreditation Services accredited or that they've just applied for accreditation but don't have it yet. So as of March, the UKAS website said they received 80 applications from such companies and had accredited nearly 30 such providers. But there are many more companies than that listed on the department's website for providers of Day 2 and Day 8 testing. 333 when I checked this afternoon. So I don't know about the Minister, but I find it absolutely astonishing that in one of the most critical parts of our defence against COVID, we're essentially relying on companies to self-certify they can do the job, and that less than 10% of them have actually been properly accredited to provide this service. We need to get much more rigorous in our testing and ensuring that these companies can do these things accurately and safely. Is the Minister able to update us on how many companies are now accredited and what the government are actually doing to properly investigate how they are operating to ensure that they are doing what they're supposed to? But in conclusion, Mr Farage, we need to ask ourselves, why do these restrictions at the border matter? They matter because new variants of concern is the biggest single risk we face to the roadmap. And obviously we've seen outbreaks of South African, Brazilian and now Indian variants in this country. And once again, particularly with the Indian variant, the government has been too slow off the mark to deal with it. It was first identified back in February, yet travel from India wasn't banned until over 2 months later. During that time, travellers from India came into the UK without any need to quarantine in a hotel. And the consequences of that are now clear in the clusters of outbreaks we are seeing. There is a suggestion the Prime Minister delayed adding India to the red list until he decided he had to cancel his trade visit to India. I suppose we'll add that to the long list of questions he will have to answer at the inquiry, but if it is true, it is another serious error of judgment from him. But in the meantime, I wonder if the Minister, when responding, can confirm whether decisions to place countries on particular coloured lists are actually all to do with health issues and considerations such as trade deals are not considered at all. But we do need to get this right now, Mr Farage. A comprehensive, easily understood system that doesn't undermine the gains we've made is necessary. The government only finally decided to introduce hotel quarantine system back in February, over a year after cases first arrived in this country. That is inexplicable. But the fact that they continue to proceed with this ineffective system that is clearly not working and is creating the injustices that we've heard about today is also inexcusable. They failed with their inadequate border protections for COVID. They were late to home quarantining, late to mandatory border testing, late to hotel quarantining, and late to add India to the red list. We cannot afford the government to be late to fix the ambiguity and confusion over the amber list as well. The public have made huge sacrifices, and they cannot be undone by laxity and ambiguity now. The government needs to get a grip of this situation as a matter of urgency.
Minister Churchill.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under you. I would like to firstly thank the Honourable Member for Don Valley for raising this important issue that we've debated today on behalf of the Petitions Committee, and I'd like to thank all members of the House who have taken time. I think it was a wide-ranging debate from Don Valley to Exeter to Bexhill and Battle, Ealing Southall, Bromley and Chislehurst, Richmond Park, cities of London and Westminster, Bracknell, Ellesmere Port and Nesson. And I think the one thing it did absolutely perfectly was display quite how complex this is and quite how difficult it is to get to a perfect solution. I would like to take from this the one thing that we all do agree on is that basically people have made enormous sacrifices both in the country and out of the country, and that the vaccine rollout has been a tremendous success. However, I would point out that we have not yet reached the sub-30 age group. And whilst everybody was very lucid on letting people who'd had a vaccination go, nobody said anything about allowing those who hadn't had, or what the solution was there. So this debate ranged, as I said, from the travel industry to business travel, covered Department for Transport, jobs. It went across a wide range of departments. But really at its heart was how we're dealing with family and friends. The past 14 months have presented huge challenges for all of us, and it's only right that members of the public, like Ms Sinclair, should be able to debate these issues of enormous interest to us. And my heart goes out to everybody who didn't want, at this, 14 months ago, to spend the last year like this. However, many of the reasons are well known to all of us as to why people have had to make sacrifices both in the country and without. Last Monday we took an important step in moving to step 3 of the government's roadmap, and in that we removed the step stay in the UK. International and leisure travel is slowly, and I would repeat slowly, starting again, and there is a new traffic light system. In essence, this petition asks whether family members and unmarried partners should be able to visit their families and partners abroad, specifically regarding the stay-at-home and stay-in-the-UK measures, which were in effect until the 29th of March and the 17th of May, respectively. During stay in the UK, individuals had to have a reasonable excuse to leave the UK, and as with all restrictions over the course of this pandemic, no decision is easy and nothing has been taken lightly. Where international travel is concerned, we acted to control the spread of the virus and reduce the risks of variants being imported and exported. And it struck me as quite interesting that people assume that this is a completely possible thing to do whilst exempting people on a whole range of different areas. Now, the Honourable Member for Ellesmere Port and Nesson, his party, I have debated often against them on the fact that we should have a more stringent managed quarantine system. Everybody can't have everything. We have to have a balanced approach to what we are doing. And at the heart of everything is protecting people. And we are opening up, but we are going slowly. Where international travel is concerned, as I say, we don't want to either export or import variants. Infection rates fell back at points, but crucially, there is a large amount of the population who isn't yet vaccinated. So it's vital we maintain additional restrictions while the programme continues through the cohorts and to counter the risk of import or export. I, of course, appreciate the desire to see loved ones. I sympathise with those who haven't seen partners and family members for a long time, and I too, like everyone else in this room, have constituents who have come to me with the challenges. I recognise how difficult it is for people with family and partners based abroad. The pandemic has presented unprecedented challenges, and my thanks go to everyone for their contribution and for all those working in the health service that has allowed us to arrive where we are today. Acknowledging these instances with family members overseas, stay in the UK regulations included a number of reasonable excuses which nobody appeared to allude to allow international travel in circumstances where visits couldn't be delayed. And I've had constituents I'm going to try and beat the bell. And I've had constituents who have used those exemptions. They've included travelling to support someone giving birth, to accompany someone to a medical appointment, to provide care or assistance to a vulnerable person, including those of 70 years or older, or someone or a woman who's pregnant or with underlying health conditions, or to say your last goodbyes at the end of life. So there have been possibilities. To say there have been none is just wrong. You could also travel out of the UK to attend your own wedding or civil partnership, or that of a close family member. if at least one of the persons getting married or entering the partnerships lives outside the UK. However, as part of the roadmap, the government took the prudent decision, informed by the latest data and analysis, not to allow international travel to see family members and partners more generally, however hard this feels. And it wasn't an easy decision. Indeed, it's one of the many tough but necessary decisions taken as we continue to follow the roadmap out of lockdown. It's about finding a balance between priorities. The need to save lives, to mitigate another surge in infections, as well as to avoid putting pressure on the NHS. Those restrictions have bought us time. Time to establish the vaccine rollout and reduce the spread of disease. Time to vaccinate frontline staff and care staff. Time to vaccinate care home residents and the most vulnerable. We continue to make good progress. As of the 22nd of May, over 37.9 million people have received their first vaccine, another 22.6 million people have received their second dose, and a staggering 60.5 million COVID vaccine doses have been administered across the UK by the enormous efforts of our general practice teams, pharmacists and the mass vaccination centres. Public Health England reports that the UK COVID vaccination programme has prevented about 12,000 deaths in those aged 60 or above in England. Furthermore, it's saved 33,000 hospital admissions for those over 65. Restrictions on international travel have helped us achieve these things, and they've helped protect people so we can move to step 3. It's important we remain vigilant and continue to manage the risks so we don't lose the benefits and efforts thus far. Step 3 includes a cautious managed return of international leisure travel, which I hope colleagues across the House will embrace. And I will go on to some of the specifics brought up by people, but I do think it's important to keep in mind that we are opening up. I also think that we only had indication that that our vaccination, both Pfizer and AstraZeneca, were effective against the Indian variant this weekend. So asking us to see into the future with these things is incredibly difficult. As of May the 17th, we moved to a traffic light system which categorises countries based on their level of risk to public health and their potential effect of variants of COVID-19 to limit the efficacy of the rollout. Decisions on designating countries to red, amber or green lists and the associated border measures are under constant review to ensure that we manage the risks. And these risks are challenging. They do mean people's jobs. They are about livelihoods. They are about all those things and the impact, but they are predominantly about people's health and well-being and protecting people. The decisions are taken by ministers who consider the joint biosecurities analysis as well as wider public health considerations. As I've explained, decisions are under constant review in order that we manage the risks. And I was glad that the Honourable Member for Linlithgow and East Falkirk outlined how rigorous this is and how we are now in better lockstep with our friends across the border. We are making progress as we journey along the roadmap, but we have to remain vigilant. Variants continue to pose a significant risk, which we are monitoring closely, and action will be taken as necessary to stop the spread. Border measures, including for testing and quarantine, continue to help manage the risks, and this includes the requirement for international arrivals, except those from green list countries, having to take a pre-departure test and isolate for 10 days either at home or in a managed quarantine hotel if they've come from a red list country, and take a post-arrival test on day 2 and day 8. Now, on testing more specifically, several people brought up testing, and I'd just like to point out that implemented on the 15th of May, NHS Test and Trace reduced the cost from £210 to £170, Day 2 tests for green list countries down to £88. These include genomic sequencing if you have a positive test, Other private providers are stringently tested to ensure quality, and they are available. PCR tests continue to fall to around £100 to £120 for a day 2 test, and expect green arrivals to be somewhere around £20 to £60. And this, as the market develops, this will keep on going and prices will become more competitive. But I would gently say, is the British taxpayer meant to pay for the test for leisure purposes and travel? Yes, of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I think I understand the point. The British taxpayer shouldn't be expected to pay for these tests for leisure purposes. But if you go on the government website now, you don't need to give a reason to receive a lateral flow test. And we know that from a number of sporting events that have taken place, the conditions for entry have been tests, which have also been 3. So there isn't any consistency here, is there?
So, thank you, Madam Chairman. As I say, these things are kept under constant review. That is DCMS are testing large-scale events on large groups of in-country crowds. That is completely different to those people who are returning to the country. Measures for these international travels are essential, and it's vital to continue that we follow what restrictions remain in place. It's also essential that offers of vaccination are taken up by everybody as soon as possible. We hope that the continued success of the vaccination rollout, including increased testing capabilities, alongside falling infections and hospitalisations, will allow us to continue to lift restrictions. But we have to protect our hard-fought gains made over the last few months, and we are taking a cautious approach, opening up international travel, given the risk is not only to the individual, but also to wider society, with those travelling back from countries with high prevalence or where there are variants of concern. Some people brought up the difference between allowing us to enlarge business travel and the travel to visit family and friends and so on. They are in fact completely different. I very rarely behave with family and friends as I might in a business meeting, so I would have a little caution as to drawing the comparison that those two are similar. I also, like everybody else, feel for travel agents and so on in this time of uncertainty. However, they are supported by Her Majesty's Treasury and the different interventions that have been put in place, and those things are ongoing after we open up on the 21st of June, as long as we keep on the roadmap, and there is some assistance for businesses going forward. This is a first step, and more opportunities will come along, and I think it's important to remember that, and to highlight that JVC looks at the outcome of vaccine programmes on reduced levels of infection, high levels of vaccination, and also the transmission risk and variants of concern. I reiterate my sympathy for those who haven't been able to visit family and partners, and my thanks to those who have stepped up. Getting to this point has taken remarkable perseverance and resolve, and I'm grateful for everyone who's got us here. The collective effort has meant that we can reopen our borders, allowing us, where possible, to reunite families, loved ones and friends. We must continue this careful approach. It is a risk-based approach, informed by the latest data, scientific evidence and the abiding need to protect health, the population's well-being and thereby the economy. With all this in mind, I believe we have good reason to feel optimistic. And there will be new and unexpected challenges, and there will be some setbacks as well. I haven't hugged some of my children, and they all live in this country for 14 months, yet. We have a large family. It is tough, I get that, but we are doing what we are doing for the right reasons. We are better prepared and better protected than we ever have been to take them on.
I would like to thank all honourable and right honourable members for their contributions today. There was excellent contributions from the member from Bexhill and Battle, who I know is a real champion for this travel sector. I thank my right honourable friend from Bromley and Chislehurst. His note on how valuable inland tourism is for our country is something that we should all take note of. I hope when we do open up, we will welcome tourists with open arms. £28 billion will really help get our country back working again. To a member from Bracknell, reminded us how successful our vaccination programme has been, and I thank all who have played their part in making this happen. To the petitioners, I hope you feel as though you have had your voice heard. I personally enjoyed speaking with Kate and Luke, and I wish you all the best in the coming months. And to the Minister, I would like to thank her for her understanding of our country's sacrifice and her compassion in her reply. I know, as she does, that with every exemption this country brings with it another infection. She did also mention of the exemptions that we're allowed. I agree a balance is difficult, but I do also agree with the petitioners that more economical testing would help with that balance, so I will be looking forward to falling costs. Finally, I would like to thank Ms Foyer for your chairmanship today. It has been a pleasure serving under you.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 565102 related to international travel and COVID-19. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. Please all members leave the room promptly by the exit door on the left whilst observing social distancing. Thank you.